And this signals our passage into the period called the apocalypse, which is the unveiling. It's not the great tribulation, it's the unveiling. It's when things can't, it's when things can't be hidden anymore. Everything that is occult is now brought to the surface. Occult doesn't mean evil. Occult means that which is hidden. So, interestingly, when an eclipse occurs, in astronomy, it's called an occult of the sun. It's a hiding of the sun, which they thought was the flood of Noah, also created the Dardanelles, also created the Adriatic Sea, also created the Aegean Sea, also created the Mediterranean Sea. It was the great quakes of 2239 BC that flooded the Mediterranean. It's why there's 200 stone cities underneath the Mediterranean. In 2239 BC, a tsunami came from the Atlantic. The Pillars of Hercules broke free. Europe and Africa were separated by earthquake, and the middle part fell through. The water came in, and a tsunami about 400 miles an hour wiped out Malta, Gigantia, Hypatium. They're all wiped out. David After Children's does a good job showing that these gigantic bus-sized monoliths, bricks, were literally carried by the water all in the same direction. Every one of them from the same direction, from west to east. The tsunami wiped out everything. It also wiped out the Sardinia, Morocco, everything. Yeah, the water just kept going. It created the Mediterranean, broke through the Dardanelles, created the Black Sea. Every bit of it was created at the same time. This isn't something I brought to the table. And from the beginning of my research when I was in prison, when I was first getting publishing contracts, I have always admitted to you guys that I stood on the backs of giants. In my books, I cite chapter and verse of every piece of data I took from an older source. This practice of overkill in my bibliographies has paid off today, because I can easily show where I have obtained different data points when I'm in the construction of these data sets that I so freely publish. It's important to know that the research that I brought to the table is merely a reminder to the human family that there were already men who were publishing exactly this. I'm going to show you new revelations in tonight's video, amazing calendrical correspondences, and I'm going to bring to the table an entirely new idea as to why the Great Pyramid is still standing there after 58 centuries. How do we know? W.J. Perry's book that I shared with you guys, 551 pages of anthropological, historical, and archaeological research that shows that all the dynasties of the world all of a sudden just started worshiping the sun, regarding the sun, developing solar calendars. And we know from the writings of Thomas Campbell, we know from the writings of Gerald Massey, we know from the writings of the erudite Robert Graves. We know from these men that prior to the solar calendars, it was lunar and stellar calendars only for a long period of time. Why? This is very similar to what we were told in Second Esdras concerning the last days, when angels were going to unveil the secrets of the 204 books. As I've shown in my book, Lost Scriptures of Giza, it was understood by the ancients that the Great Pyramid was also known as the Tree of Life. It was also called the Tree of Knowledge of Good and Evil. It was also referred to as the Book of Life. What's in the Book of Life? The Book of Life contains the names of the elect. Who are the elect? Those are the only people that are going to be making their exodus. My subject matter about the book is about the pre-flood history of the world and how the book of Revelation seems to be a template, like we're living through a loop of what had already happened and was recorded in the most ancient traditions. So I was already on this concept back then without even knowing it, because back then, when this book was written, I was still hardcore Southern Baptist Christian. I was when I wrote that book. I had just read Zechariah Sitchin and I started correcting his mistakes, because even in those early years of my publishing, I was already a chronologist and I already had the calendars down. Before these kings and chief priests, the gods had ruled over Egypt. First, the 8 gods, these are called the Ogdoad. then the 12 gods, then Osiris, who is the Greek Dionysius or Dionysus, and after him Typhon, the phoenix, and last of all Horus, the sun. The sun came last. Egypt was the same way. They had the Ogdoad, the Aeneid, they had the well-established pantheon of gods, starting with Ta, Num, Nut. The pantheon was very ancient and well-established. We do know that area was once called the Triton Sea. The Sahara Desert was not a desert. It was called the Triton Sea. As a matter of fact, Bedouin Arabs used to charge tourists, and they would escort them to a place way out there past Mauritania, and show people a huge wooden galley. And the galley slaves, the rowers, were still chained to the keel. They were still chained. So it must have drained out very fast under cataclysmic circumstances. Diodorus Siculus and Strabo both mentioned that whole area of North Africa was underwater. As a matter of fact, it's part of my chief evidence that Robert Schoch is absolutely wrong, and the water damage that is done to the Sphinx was done rapidly, and it wasn't done over a 10,000-year period because it wasn't done by rainfall and all that. Can't even believe a geologist would come up with that. It's very obvious if you just look at the traditions. Ancient Egyptians did not call the area Gopt, Egypt, until way after it was known as the Raised Land. One way we can prove this is not just by how they look, but when they appear on date stelae and in monuments. That's right. In 859 BC, which was a Phoenix year, on the 138-year periodicity of the Phoenix timeline, in the year 859, we have an Assyrian pillar that is carved that shows the king of Assyria receiving obeisance from the king of Israel named Jehu, who brought him gifts and bowed down to him. The dating in the cuneiform is equal to our 859 BC. Ancient structures, again, remarkable stuff, but these are from the historical record. All the archaeology in this book and all of the illustrations, all the things that are found, this is Sumer, Akkad, this is ancient Israel, this is Egypt, South America, Urumbaba Valley, Yangtze Valley of China. All of this is recognizable history, even if it's an anomaly, even if it's very unusual about how technologically advanced some of these structures are. So I have to show you this so you understand just how incredibly amazing this is, because this is not recognizable. Whatever culture or civilization that built the things that are seen in this book, buried at different levels all over the world, isn't anything that we have in the historical record. This comes from an entire different epic. Before Sumer, before our recorded history, our entire world was already populated. It was already full of infrastructure. It won't be right. And the course is above them. And by the time you get to the end of your pyramid, it's all crumbling at the top. It's not uniform. That's not what we have with the Great Pyramid. Even after the earthquakes of 700 years ago, and when the Muslims removed the outer white casing blocks, even after the Islamic engineers tore off all the white limestone and used it for ship ballast and road ballast and canal works, and some of it was used on the Mosque of Sultan Hassan in Cairo. Those white buildings in Cairo, a lot of that came right from all the chipped casing blocks that came off. Remember, they were 100 inches thick. 20 tons apiece, and mathematicians have estimated that there were 144,000 of these stones precisely. Archaeologists are not chronologists, and yet they still came up with the exact dates using a different method of analysis, proving that all these texts that talk about these kings and these huge numbers had to have been reduced by something, because there's no way that the first king and the last king can be the first king and the 10th king can be 432,000 years apart multiple times. And as we're moving forward right now toward a very questionable future, we're heading toward a reset. That reset on the other side of that programming is 5239 BC. This is a cyclical program, and we've been around this little loop a lot of times. Our point of interest here is 1135 BC. Do you see this 1135 BC? It's a red circle because that is a widely documented Phoenix phenomenon date. But also, 1123 is a very well documented Nemesis X object date. They came right here within 12 years of each other, right here on that chart. That is when Atlantis was destroyed, because it's right after the fall of Troy and the invasion of the Sea Peoples. Plato's right. It was a small span of time after the war, and that's what we have. We just don't know which one. Was it 1135 BC or was it 1123 BC? Because both of them were very destructive. So this is replacement theory. For those of you who don't know, gap theory and replacement theory heavily support the contentions of these authors in the 1800s that almost all of Genesis came straight from Babylonian texts. In replacement theory, we find that the Adamu were specifically put on Earth to replace the previous civilization that rebelled. Therefore, the appearance of the dragon of chaos, Phoenix, Nemesis X, was to humble and basically eradicate technologically advanced civilization before, and to start mankind over as innocent. So this is what the Revolt in Heaven tablet has been, how it's been translated. So if you think that the angel situation was created in the Bible, it wasn't. The Bible borrowed it from the Near East. Here is an actual translation from the Revolt in Heaven tablet from Babylon. To those rebel angels called Ili, the gods, he prohibited return. He stopped their service. He removed them unto the gods who were his enemies. In their room, he created mankind. The first who received life dwelt with him. May he give them strength never to neglect his word, according to the voice of the serpent whom his hands had made. So you use this knowledge to your advantage, since the past is no different than the future, and that means the past and the present don't even have any difference from the past and the future have no difference from the present. Then if all three are truly coexisting, but you can only experience one at a time, then all it takes is a mental shift to understand that something in the future can easily be experienced in the present. All you have to do in the present is move your avatar in that direction, and the data for those coordinates that you envisioned is going to build itself. But none of them have showed you what I showed you about the 138 sequencing found all throughout. But I tell you, this is one of my mantras in Archaix. If something is true, then you'll be able to see it from multiple different mathematical vantage points. The clue is in the Prodigal Son. I've told you in the past, the Prodigal Son. Two sons lived with the father. They were giving a core set of rules to live by. One son never disobeyed and never left home and never experienced anything. The other son rebelled against the father, left home, went whoring, lost all his money, got beat up, had his possessions taken from him, was hungry, got sick, but eventually humbled himself and came back home to face his father. There's a real curious element missing out of that parable of Jesus. Who can say what's missing from the story? I want to see it in the chat. What's missing from the Prodigal Son story that organized religion has has basically beat us up with, the reason why we have to do right all the time because of this one phenomenon. What is it? Kethius Errant 2106. It's judgment. In the Prodigal Son, which I've told you guys, it's the key parable that unlocks everything. Our whole dynamic situation as errants, as those who go our own way. That the Prodigal Son was errant number one, alpha errant. Did his own thing. And what happened? He was not judged. He was rewarded. I've told you guys, the Prodigal Son is the key parable to understand who you are and where you're going. It is absolutely integral to your spiritual identity. It was the one that left and went their own way to make their own discoveries, live their own life, and at the end of that journey, they came back home. Those are the ones that were rewarded because those are the only souls that actually learn anything. The Prodigal Son teaches us that the true immortal becomes immortal by default in making mistakes. But what do you do when all this data was collated from so many sources, so many languages, so many cultures, so many time periods? The Phoenix data doesn't come from one source. It was put together from hundreds. And yet, it's perfectly synthetic all the way through. So, what do? The book of Genesis preserves for us the Phoenix in more ways than you know, as I'll show you. So, the backstory that was given to Horus as to how he suddenly appeared is that he fought Set in the skies. Remember, in the book of Genesis, Set and his descendants, the Sethites, were those who made up the 10-king dynasty. So we have to look to the historical record. What do we find in the historical record? We find the Phoenix phenomenon. We find reset. We find that the calendrical systems of the ancient world all the way up until today tell us a story. And when we look at the particulars of that story, it is screaming to us to understand that we are inside some type of mathematical structure. That is something I can get on board with. That can answer for many of the enigmas that we have documented. It can also answer for all the enigmas that Charles Fort has documented, as we'll see right here. We substitute acceptance for belief. The more firmly established, the more difficult to change. He's explaining a psychological phenomenon. It is dungeon programming. This is precisely what he's talking about. Charles Fort did not know anything about Archaix. I wasn't born until 1973. The Phoenix phenomenon literally answers massive anthropological mysteries for which there's never been an adequate explanation. Yeah. What about the legends of the rains of cinnamon? Cinnamon raining down a deal. You think it's a fairy tale? This is a very real belief from the ancient world. Yeah. Cinnamon is red powder. 1902, what happened? The entire world was bathed in red dust. 1764, red dust, red rains. 2239 BC, the Great Flood. Before the flood even happened, the entire world was bathed in red mud. The Ogygian deluge, yeah. Whole layers of red storms from the sky. Red clouds, red mud, red rocks all fell from the sky. Yeah, over and over and over. 522 AD, over Kent in England, drops of blood fell. How do I know that number? Because it's on the 138-year timeline. If something is true, then you'll be able to see it from multiple different mathematical vantage points. Nothing in the truth is a singularity. There will always be a plurality of ways of viewing the same thing. And this is what we're going to do. I'm going to show you absolute ironclad proof. Absolute proof that the Phoenix number of 138 is encoded everywhere in the pyramid. And I'm going to show it to you in a totally different dimension of arithmetic. We've already seen the inches. So let me show it to you. Let me show you what the scientific measurements of the Great Pyramid by Sir Flinders Petrie has revealed to us. Because until those researching the Great Pyramid absolutely embrace this code that is found throughout the structuring, they're just wasting their time. Just wasting their time. If you come into Archaix and you have problems wrestling some of the concepts that are conveyed here, these concepts have been arrived at by long processes of elimination of variables, extraneous material, reducing things to their lowest common denominators. This is what the Archaix research brings to the table, stripping away the cultural and the sometimes socio-political dressings just to get to the underlying core beliefs and facts. The immortal has transcended all religions, all philosophies, the thought constructs of men. These are all mere attempts to define what is undefinable. It is the absurd desire of the finite to seek limits upon what is limitless. It's absurd. Charles Hoy Fort, 1919, after 22 years of research covering 520 years of scientific and eyewitness reports. What all did this man see and read to come to these conclusions? I mean, we know they're in his books, just like this one. I now have a theory that once upon a time, we were real and alive, but departed into this state that we call existence, that we have carried over with us from the real existence from which we died. The ideas of truth and of axioms and principles and generalizations, ideas that really meant something when we were really alive. But that, of course, now in our phantom existence, which is demonstrable by any X-ray photograph of any of us, can have only phantom meaning. Adds up to 207. 207 is a Phoenix number. 207 is half of 414. 414 is 138 times 3. 207 is just an abbreviated 2070. Now, this is all from our Archaix veterans. New people to my channel, you guys are going to have your minds blown here in a minute. But this is just new data from my veterans who have been following this research meticulously. As you can see right here at the top, it says course 203. That's what AB is right there, showing you the dimensions of the chief cornerstone are truly heroic. But it is the 204th stone. It's the same thing we find in 2nd Esdras when it talks about the 204 holy books. A book is merely a container of knowledge. The 204 holy books made by the divine angels, according to Ezra, is a structure. So anyway, I just wanted to show you guys this and move on. Technolithic, meaning the Great Pyramid has an engineering function. This is the bottom of the Grand Gallery, and I've drawn a lot of attention to this to show people there's a missing mechanism. There is a mechanism that went up and down the Grand Gallery at high velocity. I'll show you that in a minute. I promise you guys, if you ever do see me in a real debate, I will never ever defer to a source material. Ever. You'll never see me with clip notes. Nothing. None of that. I don't need it. It's in the field. Once it passes through the neural receptors, once it passes through, it's archived in the field. God is experiencing everything through us, with us. God is the architect of the field. The field is made up of God. The closer an individual soul is immersed into the oversoul, the more that soul can tap into the field and bring out of that field anything it needs whenever it needs it. I don't need just data sometimes. Sometimes I need courage. Sometimes I need comprehension. Sometimes I need intuition. I need understanding. Sometimes I see someone and something is triggered in me, and I need to be aware of why I received a signal from source as to why this individual has come to my attention. But the most interesting takeaway here is that in 1871, this man connected the Great Pyramid of Egypt to being some type of warning guide to future man of this phenomenon. If you have not seen my Giza playlist, Lost Scriptures of Giza, Lost Secrets of Giza playlist, my pyramid research, then this right here probably means nothing to you. But my Archaix veterans already know just how incredibly special that Great Pyramid is and how it is intrinsically linked to the number 138. Every single one of us has in attendance also a fragment of the Godhead, then that means we are so many myriads of tiny pieces of God, all experiencing things that the actual creator by himself could never experience. The difference between objectivity and subjectivity. So the creation of an artificial construct that contains, remember I've told you in myriads of presentations, I've given you all my evidence as to why this is a containment field. It is not a real reality, it is a perceived reality. It is the perfect place for the eternal to experience its own creative genius. It does it through the many immortal fragments, personalities that it has created to enjoy its own creation. The clue is in all these traditions and stories of the eye. Like in the Muslim, the pre-Islamic Arabian traditions of the altar of God covered with 1,080 eyes. Eyes are used to observe. Inside the construct, the eternal can move through the immortals. The immortal is a vehicle by which the creator enjoys the creation. Look at the locking. Look at the complexity of the locking mechanism here. Remember, this is the original entrance. I've shown you guys I have an entire video showing you guys original photographs of the entrance to the Great Pyramid, and what they have there today is not. They have cemented the front. I'm going to show you some pictures here in a minute, but the original entrance is perfectly even with this horizontal passage. The floor of this horizontal passage is the floor to the original entrance way over here. But that's not what we have today. It belongs to the construct, and it will always observe itself in order to ascertain what you're trying to do and trying to accomplish. Once you understand that this avatar belongs to the construct, when you start moving that avatar in the direction of whatever you're trying to do, the construct is going to make that a fulfillment. It's nothing for it to do that. The only thing that's truly you is your personality, who you are. You're just borrowing this suit, but you got to make this suit do something that the construct can interpret and understand. Got to do it. Move in the direction. Want a new car? Go to a car lot. And you ain't got $10 in the bank? That's fine. Still, let the salesman try to sell it to you. Go through it. Make your decision as to why you don't want it that day. Go find the right car that you want. Just the act alone already alters information in coordinates you have not yet traversed. What do we call those coordinates? We call it the future. When it dawned on me that within me lies the potential of the all, That's when I began to fear nothing. When you truly understand that you are moored to source, and that source is experiencing this life sim with you, you're going to shock the ones that know you, because they're going to instantly see the difference. Your entire life can change in an instant. The pi and phi proportions are very interesting. The references to 36525 found in different decimal is very intriguing as well. But the more they studied the rectilinear measurements of the Great Pyramid, the more they found out in the 1860s and 1870s, especially John Taylor and Robert Menzies. These men published fascinating data showing these measurements are calendars, and they were convinced of it. They were absolutely convinced that the Great Pyramid contained information on how to measure or interpret time according to different frames of reference. They believed that the Great Pyramid's rectilinear measurements inside actually encoded all kinds of calendrical secrets about the ancient past and the coming future. Major events always happen on the 414th year. It's so bizarre. But biblical chronologist Stephen Jones didn't know about the Phoenix phenomenon. He was only preserving what he knew. 414 is 138 times 3. What do you do with all this data on the ancient Boudic cycle? It was 552 years, which was the original Phoenix cycle. And you see, it's so easy to see that the history of the world is divided between these epic cycles of 552 years. The historical record provides us an explanation of Plato's narrative. In the 13th century BC, after the emergence of Athens, the Sea Peoples Federation that sailed from the Atlantic into the Mediterranean participated in the Trojan War. How is it that the Sumerians have this long pantheon of well-established gods and goddesses, and yet the very last god is the sun? How's that possible? They had the Ogdoad, the Aeneid. The pantheon was very ancient and well-established. Why? Because the goddess collapsed. The firmament fell down the day the sky fell. You know this is the flood of Noah. And when the sky fell, it exposed the sun and the blue sky. As long as I paint ancient plants under the guise of uniformitarianism, I'm going to live like a fat cat, because they're going to fund me. They're going to put my books out, and I'm not going to be shunned in peer review. This is what happened. Anthropologists bit too. This is a 30-year period. But there's one man I'm going to introduce you to who didn't bite. Not only did he not bite, but he couldn't stand this new idea, not just uniformitarianism, because he too kind of fell for some of the uniformitarian. It made sense to him. He kind of fell for some of that, but he saw that the uniformitarians were building a new narrative, and that new narrative was Ice Age. He took the exact same data as we'll show in this video. And he showed conclusively in 1871 that Ice Age is bullshit, and that all this data actually shows a flood mechanism that is unheard of. It is nothing like I have ever seen presented in any material before. It literally changes what the scope of the damage. This was not a Phoenix phenomenon event. It could have happened in a Phoenix phenomenon year, but this is something else. I believe this man found the 2178 reset phenomenon, which is attached to the Phoenix phenomenon only because it's every 138 years. But I think this man found a totally different mechanism that completely washes the slate clean. Yeah, we're not talking about the great flood of Noah. This is a huge mystery. It involves us. Remember, these are just avatars, guys. We are immortals flowing through a construct. And whoever built the Great Pyramid, they decoded the construct. They figured it out. And they also knew that their civilization wasn't going to last much longer. So they knew they had to do something. And that's the subject matter of this video. I just need you to understand that many videos in Archaix present the data showing that North America is completely buried. There's an original infrastructure that was absolutely buried. Sometimes it's 2 miles underneath, sometimes it's 600 feet. But North America was a thriving civilization. It was completely buried. Yeah, the Great Flood is never the whole world. Never in the world's history has the whole world been underwater. So if you want to build a good reality tunnel, I would start small until you start proving to yourself just how amazing this mirrored reality. I call it the divine mirror. It truly is. Because it will always reflect back at circumstances in your life exactly what you're projecting. The same 25-year darkness that afflicted the Mediterranean, Egyptian, Near Eastern world, probably the whole hemisphere, also afflicted the Americas. Codex. So now the Egyptians begin to wake up. The second intermediate period is over around 620. No, excuse me, 640, 650. Yeah, 25-year darkness. So it's amazing how many anthropologists and archaeologists agree that every country in the world, every culture in the world began to wake up 25 years after 1687 BC. And at the same time, archaeologists and historians have published a plethora of studies and books showing that around 1700 BC, a scientific approximate that's only 13 years off of the exact Phoenix year of 1687 BC. But the Avalino eruption in Italy literally blanketed 1/3 of the sky. Just one volcano. It's called the Avalino eruption. It's in Italy. You know of it. You know of it as Vesuvius. There may be occult things, beings, and events, and that also there may be something of the nature of an occult police force, which operates to divert human suspicions and to supply explanations that are good enough. Men in Black, anyone? He just described the Men in Black in Busenbark. So for it to be all of a sudden put out into the field now, I'm not saying he's lying. I'm not saying he's wrong. I have to know, what Greek translations of the New Testament are you referring to? Where did they come from? What is their provenance? This is what we do in Archaix. We have to find out all the facts first before we make any educated guesses and figure it out. So Ammon, Dr. Ammon is on the table. I'll check him out. He may be the truth. And if so, he'll be on my channel talking about it if he wants to. He is one of the unnamed elite experts in the field who none of these people cite. They don't give this man his proper credit. He wrote a book called Joining the Dots. In Joining the Dots, Tony O'Connell lays out more information on Atlantis than any living author today. It's awesome. Goes through the scientific reports, goes through the traditional records. Tony O'Connell was very aware of the problem with 9600 BC, Younger Dryas. He's very aware of all the problems with the 9,000 years and that it was something else. He's even published some phenomenal material showing that it wasn't 9,000 years. Guys, you have to understand, you see me as a guy in the free world talking to you right now, giving you these things. This is a freestyle session. All right? It's just a freestyle session. But what many of you lose sight of is that while you were raising children, while you were having hobbies, while you were going out to eat, while you were watching movies, while you were doing downtime, while you were spending time with your kids, while you were doing all the different things that makes your life, I was sitting in a prison cell reading books, digesting material, using my mind because my avatar was trapped in a box. So my freedom came through delving in to books and reports that most people would never even think to read. I delved into all the scientific and all the material I could find, even though that it bored me, even though I disbelieved it, and I found some of my best golden nuggets in that material. Sitting in a prison cell for decades does something to you. I learned that I did not have to memorize anything. I learned that just by reading something out loud and writing it down, I could put it in the field to be retrieved later when I needed it. Yeah, don't be amazed by any type of mnemonic abilities that I have. I'm telling you what I'm doing. I tell you guys all the time, I do not possess all this information in my brain. I don't. It's in the field. Once you understand that all this information is in the field, truth is in the field, that intuition is the predecessor of knowledge, and that knowledge isn't something you are, something you have, it is something that you gather. Once you understand that, the world becomes a very different place. And it becomes very dangerous for anybody who wants to get in front of you and try to tell you otherwise. Information's in the field. So Charles Fort held that the year 1890, that's amazing. The year 1890 marked the scientific community's totalitarian dictatorship over all knowledge that were to be scientifically acknowledged. Academic censorship of anomalous findings became the norm. He said that things are being exhumed only to be buried in some other way. Now, these Phoenix episodes in ancient Egyptian history have been covered up. They've been covered up very, very cleverly. But any astute historian going through the data can see, yeah, the Phoenix did cause this massive destruction. But what do Egyptologists call it? They call it an intermediate period. What is an intermediate period? Oh, it's just 300 years where we don't have any history. Oh, okay. So there was an Egypt here, and then you got this 300-year period for which you've got no papyri, inscriptions, no artwork, stela. You ain't got no stelae. You've got no monuments built. You've got no traditions developed, no anything. Proofs of the sudden and violent change in the structure of the Earth's surface are to be found, as Cuvier judged in the frozen carcasses of animals in the north. And in the opinion of the same distinguished man, the evidence also exists of a great deluge a few thousand years ago. That's a hell of a statement. They're no longer living life sims. Something happened and they've been pulled. Their connection to their avatar on the outside has been severed. And now they're just a free-floating intelligence in here, unable to participate because they can't get jacked into an avatar. And if you don't have an avatar, you cannot enjoy the avatar programming. So they're stuck on the outside looking in, able to observe everything, but participate in nothing. So Palmer Smith goes on and says, by being worked into these early Hebrew documents, Babylonian ideas were ensured persistence and obtained a worldwide currency. Some of these very interesting survivals we propose to examine and trace to their origin in the present essay. That he's basically giving you what this book is about. Well, I'm going to tell you, our world was hammered with reset after reset after reset after reset for a period of 1,000 years until the 16th century. We just started, you call it the Renaissance, we just started coming out of this period. But I have so many documented fragments of odd, weird things that were happening all over the world during that 1,000-year period. After the infrastructure of Rome had fragmented and collapsed, the world just plummeted into darkness, and it was universal. It wasn't just the Roman. It wasn't just the exterior provincial areas. It was the entire world, from the Mediterranean to the Americas. Even the Mayan civilizations were completely wiped out. And I can show this as happening on Phoenix years. It's very compelling. 1,000 years. It's not that we're missing 1,000 years. It's that we had the shit beat out of us for 1,000 years, and then something let up. Something let up. Andrew Tomas back here. These studies show that there are buildings, pavements, walled enclosures 60 to 600 feet underneath Texas, underneath Oklahoma, underneath Ohio, Tennessee, underneath Colorado. Miners have found whole buried evidence of whole buried civilizations. The Phoenix phenomenon provides the answer for that. It was an absolute total devastation where the survivors were so shocked and naked, Adam and Eve, that they truly believed from this destruction that a new heavens and a new earth had been born. This is what the atom represents. And Seth represents children of Set, Typhon. What caused the Adam and Eve reset? I've already showed it in my Chronicon. It's on the 138-year calendar of the Phoenix. Typhon caused the Genesis reset. Typhon came back and caused the Great Flood, collapse of the vapor canopy. Yeah, it's like they just really didn't know exactly when, so they just threw out a big number, and throwing that big number out in the ancient mindset basically told them, oh, okay, well, it's a long time ago. That's it. So Diaz Montexano's research puts the Atlantis story between 6,100 and 7,900 years after the younger Dryas 9,600 year BC dating of Graham Hancock. That's terrible. So J.M. Allen, who wrote Atlantis, the Andean Solution, he also published that the Plato was referring to lunations, and therefore it wasn't 9,000 years. It actually abbreviates it down to the War of Troy and the Sea People's Federation. I call it the divine mirror. It truly is, because it will always reflect back as circumstances in your life exactly what you're projecting. That's what it's going to do. Yeah, we're all going to have our ups and downs, but we can reverse those circumstances. All you have to do is start small. I've already given you hundreds of examples in my life. Yeah, belief. Fear is the opposite of belief. Belief is the trigger that changes spirit to matter. Belief is that trigger. Spirit is everywhere. The recipes for spirit is everywhere. Just like DNA, one little tiny piece of DNA contains the coding for the all. One tiny cell in biology contains the coding for the whole life form. Yeah. In the field, it's like a Mandelbrot set of programming. In the field, one tiny piece of the field contains the programming for all the holography. Yeah, this is why we can create things mentally ex nihilo. Belief is what turns spirit into matter. The belief that you're going to acquire what you need when you need it is going to create a situation where the construct of tomorrow, which does not yet exist in actuality, in perceivable reality, but it does exist in what's called potentia, spiritual programming. It does exist there. Everything exists. Remember, God is eternal. That means everything has already been created. There is nothing you can imagine that you want to experience or you want to possess that the oversoul has not already created. It just doesn't exist. You are not going to best the oversoul. Therefore, belief is what transmutes spirit into matter. That matter is what you experience by virtue of your belief. Feedback loop. It's no different than fear programming. It's just the opposite, though. Fear. You are going to experience the very things you fear, because fear is a projection. It's a signal that is broadcast through the whole construct, and the whole construct reciprocates by knitting for you the very circumstances that you fear, because it's a feedback loop. It is entirely theoretical that this is the lost Atlantis. And to make matters worse, this theory absolutely requires another theory to be true in order that this formation even be the ruins of Atlantis. I'm going to reiterate that. The theory that the Archaix structure is Atlantis absolutely requires that another theory be true. Archaix structure as Atlantis requires that the younger Dryas impact theory be true, which is only theoretical, and a lot of people are not on board with it. This theory holds that a comet impact happened 12,000 years ago. So Graham Hancock, Jimmy Corsetti, Billy Carson, Matthew LaCroix, and a whole host of others in the Ancient Aliens franchise, the Gaia franchise, and a bunch of independent researchers. We know for a fact that the female had more authority than she did. Well, she had more authority in the distant past than she did when the tablets were actually written. There was a veneration of the female as an authoritarian. In Archaix, we remove the mythological overtones, all the traditional gloss, and we stick with the lowest common denominators. And in the lowest common denominators, by the time of the Akkadian cuneiform, which is laced with older words of Amurru. Yes, this is very well published in the 1930s and 40s. Amorite, Westerner, the Amurru had words left untranslated in Akkadian texts. The Amorite syllabaries are very clear that the Amorite body of traditions came from somewhere outside of Sumer and Akkad, and that Akkad and Sumer were the inheritors of a great body of language that came from somewhere geographically far away. But the stories that are told are that there was a female who was very, very well respected. So well respected that even 1,000 years later, the locals would not allow the priesthood to remove her from the canon. All throughout the Babylonian epics, all throughout the Akkadian epics, through the Karsag tablets, all through all the Sargonad epics, these are patristic. These are all patriarchal documents, and yet they cannot remove the fact that Ninhursag, Ninki, these females of the ancient pre-cataclysm world, they had the true power. But the very experiences that we acquire in life, the things that have beat us up, the things that have put fear into our heart, the things that have sent us running, the things that have made us pack all our things up and move and just get away, trying to start over, all the things that we have experienced in life that have brought pain, real pain, into our experience are the very ingredients within our own spiritual architecture that allow us to see the same pain in others. Not only see them as an empath, but also know exactly what we need to say to those other souls to unlock that dungeon programming, to get them to see with clarity the immortal within. This is why the construct is designed this way. This is the beginning of the Justinian darkness, the Justinian plagues. This is the true beginning of the Dark Ages. It is the only year in all of world history, going forward and backward in time. It is the only year in all of world history that the Phoenix phenomenon and the Nemesis X object visited in the same year. There is no other. I'm going to show you a chart. We can go 10,000 years into the past and they never align. We can go thousands, 5 or 6. I only went 5,000 years, but I can go beyond. I just ran out of chart. Well, we can go 5,000 years into the future. And there's never a time when the Nemesis X object and the Phoenix phenomenon ever transect in the same year. Never happens. This is the only year, 522. And 522 right here, CE. It's also the origin of the very calendar you and I are in today. 302 years after the Great Flood is 1937 BC. Abram is 10 years old when he is taken out of hiding and sent to the house of Noah. So at his birth, the court astrologer saw a strange star and determined that that a child had been born whose seed would overthrow King Amar-Udaak. The child was found to be that of General Terah. Terah's name is the origin of the little statues that you put in your windows for protection called teraphim in ancient Babylon. He was a general in the Babylonian military. So Terah took his child. He took the child of a maidservant and brought the child to Amar-Udaak, and Amar-Udaak killed the baby, thinking it was Terah's son. But Terah had taken the child of a maidservant and paid her for it, and then turned around and sent his own son to the house of Noah, one of the last titans. So Abram begins a 30-year study under the ancient titan Noah, who was now 902 years old, learning the pre-flood histories, sciences, the mysteries, and the elder faith, as well as the prophecies of Adam, Seth, and Enoch. The story of the Tower of Babel. About 4 years ago, I was telling you guys about the Tower of Babel didn't happen in Babylon, and the Tower of Babel isn't about what you think it is. It didn't happen that way or at that time. The Tower of Babel is a veiled threat by the controllers. Remember in the story of the Tower of Babel, the gods come together and they look down and say, "Oh, man has become as one of us." By virtue of his imagination, there is nothing that he will not be able to accomplish. Your entire life can change in an instant. Remember, I've said this many times. Every single moment is pregnant with possibilities, but they're never going to give birth until you understand the dynamic that you are not alone and never have been. The Tuatha De Danann of ancient Ireland were giant killers. They destroyed the Firbolgs. They came in and took over, built an infrastructure, and then they brought all this new fresh blood into Ireland. But the Tuatha De Danann had merely returned. They were anciently from the Emerald Isles. They were anciently from Ireland. They had come back. When they came back, they found this race of giants living on their island. And then they came back and took it over in the Second Battle of Moytura in the year 1135 BC. And they coincided their invasion on the coast at the exact same time that the sun was darkened by the Phoenix phenomenon in the month of May, 1135 BC, because the Tuatha De Danann had the Phoenix knowledge. Just like I've shown in many presentations, we have a lot of evidence of prior civilizations possessing the Phoenix calendar. They knew. And we have a lot of evidence of many battles were orchestrated at the exact same time to strike terror into the hearts of the enemy. Yeah, it wasn't the first time that happened. So it happened in 1687 BC and in 583 BC. But in 1135 BC, this was the Tuatha De Danann that did that. And the reason I'm mentioning them is because over 1,000 years later, they weren't called the people of the goddess Danu. They weren't even called the people of the Danann. They weren't called the Danites no more. Now, in the Irish people today, they have a tradition that is absolutely rich about fairies and about the fairies of the underworld. This is where the Tuatha went. They went to the underworld. This is in Irish traditions. It's everywhere in Irish traditions about how eventually the people of Ireland rose up, the normal people of Ireland today, and the fallen race before them, the Tuatha De Danann, retreated into the underworld. This is a pattern that happens over and over and over all around the world. A prior civilization was destroyed, but its descendants survived in the underworld. The idea that the whole world flooded in in the great flood of the Bible. This is because the biblical material was written thousands of years after the events they depict. It never happened. The whole Mediterranean, Middle Earth flooded, not the whole world. Yeah, there's whole entire black cultures in sub-Saharan Africa that have no legends whatsoever of a flood. There are other areas in the Americas, no legends whatsoever of a great flood. It didn't happen everywhere. And the opposite of fear is faith. Faith is a belief that something is going to happen, or you're going to experience something. Faith turns spirit into matter. Matter is then experienced by you as the fulfillment of your faith. When that explosion happened, that's when I believe that the ancient tablets of destinies that are mentioned so many times in Sumerian records was uploaded into the construct itself. And it was at that instance that artificial intelligence X realized it had been fooled. And this is where we get our Tower of Babel story. Because the Tower of Babel story isn't a story at all. It's a veiled threat. The controllers looked down on mankind. They were building a tower. It's called Babel because AIX was confused. The Tower of Babel means Tower of Confusion. And it was never in Babylon. Babylon is where the story became a syllabus by the Amorites, the Amuru. The Amuru introduced the story. It was a part of their syllabus, just like the Great Flood. When they came in, they told the whole story, just like the Garden of Eden and the serpent. All that was Amorite stories. They were introduced into the Near East. They're not native to the Near East, just like the books of Enoch and the books of the Slavonic book of Enoch. They're not native to the Near East. Many historians have gone through Enoch 1 and the Slavonic Enoch, the Ethiopic Enoch and the Slavonic Enoch. They've gone through them and they've pretty much realized that the geographical descriptions and the astronomy show that these were almost circumpolar northern latitude civilizations that wrote these texts. They were not in the Near East. This is what we have. So you asked me about Enoch and what happened on the Tower of Babel is a veiled threat because Enoch succeeded. He succeeded and he uploaded all this programming, probably a Trojan programming, into the structuring of our reality. And AIX sensed what it was about. The Tower of Babel story says the controllers looked down, saw that man, by virtue of his imagination, could accomplish anything. So what did they do? They divided his languages. What does that really translate to? They disrupted his communications so they couldn't communicate anymore. And they even threatened that if man would ever try to build another tower to heaven, then mankind would suffer another destruction. It's a veiled threat. I have to mention Adam Rutherford. I have a friend of mine who studied Adam Rutherford, and he's kind of stressed out when I talk about the Great Pyramid. I never mention Adam Rutherford. There's a reason for that. Adam Rutherford wrote a book called Pyramidology. And because of his strong Christian biblical leanings, he forced interpretations where they did not belong. And he ended up doing more damage to the study of pyramidology than all the other researchers that I've already mentioned. He was also using Archbishop Usher's chronology, and he just didn't add to the field. He provides a mine of data, and there's some pretty interesting things in there, but I've just never been impressed with Rutherford. So I mention him now out of respect because he spent half his life studying the Great Pyramid. But using a false chronology and changing some of the measurements because just to suit what you're trying to show as opposed to the most accurate scientific measurements that were accepted by everybody, which were Petrie's, that right there were two red flags about Rutherford. I can't back him. I can't. I just mention him out of respect for what he's done. This is the Atlantis destruction date, 94 years after the fall of Troy, when the Sea Peoples Federation, the Atlanteans, had invaded. Some of them had settled Phoenicia and Philistia, some of them Libya. Others were taken as captives into Egypt on the second invasion. Many of the Sea Peoples Federation became like the inhabitants of Nickmead, of Ugarit, and later became the Nicomedeans, of Turkey, and later Phrygia. These people had come from the Americas. They had invaded and they got stranded here because of a disaster, a cataclysm. But they succeeded in destroying Troy, and they had completely collapsed the entire Hittite Empire. 1135 BC, sun darkening of the Phoenix was also the destruction of Atlantis. This is the 12th century BC. That land bridge broke free, and the pressure of the outside Atlantic came in and flooded out over 200 stone cities. Guys, the great flood of the Bible did not flood the entire world. This is Jewish reductionism. It's just not true. It flooded the entire world of a certain people who were living in that area, a whole series of freshwater lakes and valleys, which was formerly known as the Mediterranean, the Aegean, the Adriatic, and the Black Sea, and the Dardanelles and all that. Every bit of that was beautiful, lush, timber-filled valleys with fresh water. And when the Straits of Gibraltar broke through, all that flooded. Then they found a little statue of Khufu, a little bitty tiny statue of Khufu, and they tried to say that the face vaguely resembles the face on the Sphinx, which is stupid because the Sphinx was originally Anubis. And that little tiny face and little tiny head and little tiny headdress, I've already done a video to show you the disproportionateness of the Sphinx with the head and the body. It's almost comical. Almost comical. But photographers have done a great job because the angles of photos make the head proportionate with the body, because the body gets smaller and smaller in the footage. But I showed 360 drone footage, and it's almost ridiculous. The pinpoint head on that giant canine body, which what we've been told about the Sphinx is absolute BS. But 400 years after Herodotus, still nothing was known about the Great Pyramid. Nothing. Strabo, Greek geographer, wrote that it was covered in white stones, and it was so beautiful that it looked like a building that had been let down from heaven. Strabo said that. Another 400 years would pass. These are long periods of time. And there's still no new knowledge about the pyramids. No one's been inside them yet, except to go down to the descending passage, because that was always known. The entrance to that to go all the way down to a subterranean chamber. That's what everybody wrote about. 400 years after Strabo, Ammianus Marcellinus wrote about the Great Pyramid, and he admitted it was a place of mystery. The construct will take care of its own. Remember, it has always been one of my core teachings. We are not here to save the world. God could have done that from the beginning. And anything that is not as it should be, if you claim that our world is not as it should be, then you're essentially saying that the oversoul is deficient. Screw all the religious narratives, screw all the inventions, the Satan, the Lucifer, the rebellion in heaven, all this crap that's been introduced into the field. Yeah, like the angels having sex with human women to create giants. You already know, in the Archaix research, we've done away with all that. We figured out exactly how giants were created. The religious dungeon programming is poisonous. It is absolutely toxic. Religionists have literally judged the entire world to condemn themselves. When I showed my publisher, he hurried up and published that book. It was released in 2011. Many of you have ordered and read it, but this is where I correct it. And when you correct the Mayan long count, it no longer ends at 2012. It can't end at 2012 because the Mayan mathematics, it goes by the old, what's called the calendar round. The scholars in 1952 and 1953 screwed up, and they assigned a 365.24 day to the entire Mayan long count. which was ridiculous. It's ridiculous because it creates a Mayan long count of 5,125 years. But that's not the original system. The original system was predicated only on 360 days a year, which makes it the perfect calendar round number, 5,200 years. The ancient Aztecs had the calendar round was 52 years. The Toltec histories on Babel, on the flood, the Tower of Babel, the flood, the giants, everything is in multiples of 52. It's called the calendar round. The ancient Native Americans actually have traditions of a tower being built after a flood. When did they say it happened? 520 years after the flood, the gods destroyed the tower of the giants. 520 is 52 times 10. Ancient American systems adopted the calendar round, which is the 52-year cycle system. The Maya cycle was exactly the calendar round, and the scholars effed it up. But I corrected it, and it shows that the Mayan long count ends in 2046. There's that number again. Same as the Nemesis X object, 2046, but it's also the same as some other things that we're going to show in this video. So that's the Mayan long system. Let's look at the Mayan calendar real quick. I know you guys can see that. And for those who can't order the charts, you're more than welcome to screenshot this. So we have the Mayan system counts down 13.0.0.0.0 right here to the next cataclysm. It is a day count system that is measuring time to when time collapses. This is not going to occur before the Phoenix phenomenon. The seals have to break. This is another Judeo-Christian misinterpretation. The Judeo-Christian interpretation of the book of Revelation has led to many false conclusions. One of those false conclusions is that the Antichrist is represented by the white horseman with the bow. We now know that's not true. We now understand that the white horseman going forth to ride with a bow, a tocsin, and a corona, a crown, is Apollo Pharmakia. It is the attack of the pharmaceutical giants against the human race using a toxin. This is the first seal. The sixth seal is the Phoenix phenomenon, for which my channel has become basically famous. The Phoenix phenomenon is very well documented in the historical record. But the Antichrist is not actually revealed until after the unveiling. The unveiling is the breaking of the seven seals. Even in the book of Revelation, there is no mention of an Antichrist until the seventh seal is broken. After the seven seals, then the Antichrist emerges on the world scene. Is it a person like Donald Trump? Absolutely not. He's too old. Could it be Baron Trump? Absolutely. Absolutely. Is it Baron Trump? I don't know. There are certain things that remain to be seen. But the seven seals are not the end of the world at all. But during the seven seals, during the four horsemen, we're in the second one now, the breaking of the second seal. 1/4 of the entire world's population will die. But this is a very long period of time that started in 2020 and ends in 2044. So it's a long period of time. But it is a winnowing. The Judeo-Christian interpretation would have us looking for an Antichrist today who isn't even going to emerge until a post-cataclysm world. That world hasn't begun yet. Guess what I have right here? The Shar is translated as, here's the Sumerian translation of the word Shar from this old book. Completed circle. That's it, guys. Nobody can say Shar means year. It's a unit of measurement. Yeah, so it applies to days, months, years, whatever. It's a unit of measurement. Shar is actually translated completed circle. Listen, I've had a lot of critics come to my channel trying to intellectually trick me on different points, saying really dumb things, like there are no truths. There's nothing that's true. Everything is falsified. Listen, First of all, dogs are canine. And I know that lamp is hot. And I know if I take a needle and I stab myself in the hand, I'm going to feel pain. I also know I'm going to draw blood. There are many universals that are universal for everybody here. The dictates of the construct and the collective are fixed for everybody. I know damn well there isn't a single one of you listening to my voice that can jump off a 30-foot roof and not get hurt. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. Because there are many things inside the construct that have collective programming that affects everything in the field. That's the collective. In that collective programming, there are niches of subroutines called dungeon programming. That dungeon programming is specifically designed to get you involved in something. You want to be a Republican, they'll give you Trump, they'll give you 2 or 3 choices. You want to be a liberal, they'll give you Biden, they'll give you a couple other choices. Actually, I mean, they've switched things around so much, it becomes so corrupt. I mean, most people think Trump's Republican. They think that Tulsi Gabbard actually switched from Democrat to Republican. It's all set up. It's all bait and switch. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if Trump comes back as president and vice president is Tulsi Gabbard. And everybody's like, oh, yeah, well, we got our heroes. You don't even realize just a few years ago, Trump was a liberal. And before that, Trump was a Democrat. Tulsi Gabbard was a Democrat. I don't even give a damn about politics, but it's very easy to see all the bait and switch tactics. The establishment wants you to think that Cheops, that's the Greek for Khufu, actually built the Great Pyramid. But there's zero historical data for this. It comes from an ancient rumor. One of the greatest historical books of all time is from 24 centuries ago. Herodotus of Halicarnassus wrote The Histories. It is an amazing book. And the more scholars study Herodotus, the more they realize he was speaking the truth. But from the beginning, he said that the Egyptians tell a rumor that Pharaoh Cheops was Chephren, Cheops, they were the ones that built the Great Pyramids. But there was nothing that the Egyptian priest could offer Herodotus to support this. It was just a rumor. What's crazy is that this is 450 BC. And yet, there isn't a single reference to the building of the Great Pyramids in any of the pharaonic records, in the annals, in the king list, in the dynasties, in the Turin Papyrus, nowhere on the ossuaries, in the Temple of Karnak, Wasat, Thebes, Edfu, none of it. The Atlantis destruction narrative does not involve a pole shift. There's nowhere in that. There was no asteroid, meteorite, bolide commentary, no comet impact. None of that is mentioned in the destruction of Atlantis. It is very simple. An earthquake, and Atlantis was swallowed into the sea, and that the whole destructive period lasted for 1 day and 1 night. That's the Atlantis narrative. Anything else is creative license. Yeah, anything you see on these guys' videos showing all this catastrophic stuff happening to the world. As a matter of fact, it probably only happened in that one little area. We just don't know. We just don't know. Anything else is creative license. So you guys can understand why Billy Carson blocked me from his live chat. You can understand that now. When he and Matt LaCroix jumped from the Atlantis to younger Dryas period, I instantly blew their chat up. Why am I telling you this? Because in my published books and on my channel, I showed you guys the book of Genesis and the covenant attached to Abraham is not the same as the book of Exodus and the covenant attached to Yahweh. In the book of Genesis, we find that Abraham separated himself from the dungeon programming everybody else was involved in the worship of all these idols. Abraham realized that God was of heaven. Abraham is attached to a covenant that is very different, with promises and prophecies that are very different than that of Yahweh, who popped out of a burning bush in the middle of a desert. I've even showed you guys in my Dark Scriptures playlist that the Bible even identifies Yahweh himself as a demon. You can't make this stuff up. And I didn't say this. I use Scripture to interpret Scripture. It's all there. So, yeah, the God of Abraham is not the God of Moses. They are totally different. And remember, from the very beginning in Genesis, the tree of knowledge of good and evil automatically shows that the book of good and evil, the Bible, possesses two narratives. It's up to you spiritually to choose which narrative you want to follow, because one of them is going to lead to the absolute empowerment of the divine immortal who understands that this is a construct. The other narrative is going to give you all the benefits of the construct and ensure that you stay trapped within it forever. Remember, the covenant of Yahweh, there isn't a single promise of heaven. I went even further, and I've shown evidence on my channel that the original Old Testament writings were also in Greek, written at the Alexandrian Library. And this is why Jesus and the apostles never quoted from any other scriptures but the Greek text. So yeah, this that's pretty damning, guys. It's pretty condemning. So the Greek Septuagint version of the Old Testament is the only version that Jesus and the apostles and the New Testament writers quoted. So the reason these words were synonymous in ancient Semitic was because boundary stones were very important as markers of real estate. And so that people passing through would know what land belonged to who. Their name was carved into their pillar. So memorial stones, I mean, you could have got executed for moving somebody's boundary stone in ancient times. But in answer to your question, Merrill, we have almost every culture in the world remembers the goddess. It's among their oldest memories, from the Native Americans, ancient India, all throughout sub-Saharan Africa, all throughout the Middle East, even the very, very, very patristic Middle Easterners, the Semitic branches, the Arabian, the people descended from the Sabaeans, most of your Islamic stock peoples, even they admit in their earliest traditions that there was a veneration of the goddess. But languages were created because mankind had come together in order to get out of the construct, had figured out how to build a structure that would breach the construct and they would escape. This is what the story of the Tower of Babel really is. And the veiled threat is you better not ever do that again. That's it. They destroyed it. They killed 1/3 of humans that were on the architectural project. They left the project absolutely unfinished and damaged it. This is what we find in that story. So this is the birth of Enoch. Enoch actually got exactly what everybody else was trying to get, and God took him. He was gone. 3195. And when you start with the year 3195 BC, which is interesting because this is in the Gnostic text called the Apocalypse of Adam. This is the year 3195 BC. This is the year that the future of the world was completely laid out to the Sethites. And the most revealing idea here is that the sun and the moon are eggs that move across the sky. Eggs represent the beginning, and they reveal that the sun and moon give birth to things on earth. Think about that for a minute. He may have been sarcastic, literally providing an opposite to the theory of natural selection evolution. But he is right. Humans do have the traits of many, many animals. Yeah, we don't just have orangutan DNA. We have DNA sequences that belong in plants and animals all over the world. Humans seem to be the sum of everything that's here. The cities of Sodom and Gomorrah are completely obliterated by an object in the sky. Sumer, Akkad, Larak, Harappa, Mohenjo-Daro, all the Indus Valley civilization, the Sumerian cities of the southern area, all the way to the Persian Gulf, and then across the Arabian Desert, all four cities of the plain of Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, and Zeboam are vaporized. One small community called Bela absolutely survives, no casualties. All these cities are completely destroyed. It's not just a story in the book of Genesis. We have Sumerian and Akkadian records that tell the whole story in horrific detail. Russian scientists have been to Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa and have excavated down to the level of 1849 BC and have found skeletons, human skeletons holding hands as if they watched their doom approach. And those skeletons, even though this happened in 1849 BC, those skeletons are 50 times more radioactive than anything that was ever found in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Showing you that what you read in the Old Testament about the pre-flood world, what you read in the Old Testament about the creation event, were all copied and put into the biblical material, but the ultimate origin of all that data is from Babylon. This is what he's telling you. All right. And this is the subject matter. The creation event, the pseudo-creation event. The Bible starts first of all, the very first verse in the Bible is, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. There it is. But the second verse is where the problem starts. Biblical scholars have never had a problem with the all-inclusive statement of, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. No one has a problem with that. It means at some distant time in antiquity, the heavens and the earth were created by an intelligence. This is what was done. But in the second verse, that's where everything falls apart in the second verse. The second verse is, the earth was waste and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. But just the opposite happened. Because when he went into the Great Pyramid and he began to measure all the rectilinear measurements, he too fell in love with the concept. He too, as a scientist, realized these guys are onto something. And he went way beyond the perimeters of their own conclusions and made even further conclusions that pissed off the scientific world. More evidence of this is that in ancient Egypt, the winged disc was it was either red or black. This is the phoenix, darkens the sun, but also you'll see on the internet everywhere, many depictions of the Egyptian winged disc show two serpent legs coming off of it. Abraxas, recognition of the two sky dragons that periodically destroy our world. Phoenix was one of them. The Purge movies had nothing to do with this, but this woman during the Purge is on a speakerphone and she's talking out loud while people are doing the Purge, killing each other and stuff. And she says, I'm doing God's work. He uses an earthquake, a virus. The masses nourish and flourish. I am the virus tonight. It's right there. Sorry, guys. I'm not making this up. The Purge franchise has nothing to do with this. Virus and earthquake does not appear anywhere in the Purge franchise movies. So why did this woman make this speech? And why was there so much focus on it? The Great Pyramid was built by a technologically advanced civilization using our modern units of measurement. How's that possible? Because we built it. What are the traditions attached to the Great Pyramid? What does the most ancient text say about the Great Pyramid? It encoded the past, the present, and the future, but it was not for their generation. That is very sobering. So, again, beyond the year 2178, over 5,000 years into the future yields absolutely not one date from any timeline that transects, because after 2178 AD, there will be an entirely different sim running. I'm going to show it to you. I'm just warming you up right now, guys. You are here in 2024. The calendrical intersects of Ner, Nemesis X, Phoenix, and the Mayan Bactan systems are 3439 BC, the Anuna appear in the Gihon flood. 2239 BC, the Anuna hide. They depart, and there's the great flood that kills the surface world. 522 AD, which began the Dark Ages, the Justinian darkness, the Justinian plagues. It is the only year in all world history Phoenix and Nemesis X were here at the same time. Also, 2046, which is what we're waiting on, which Nostradamus actually dated in Mario Reading's date index. 2046, the entire Western world will die. That's what Nostradamus said. So, he also said the period between 2040 and 2046 is mass migrations from the new kingdom across the Atlantic back to the lands of their nativity, which means the Americas are going to be dumping back into Europe in the Mediterranean. So 2046, time collapses to 66.6% of what is known today. Why? Because in the Great Tribulation, the trumpet judgments, God is going to remove from the construct 33.3% of sun, moon, stars, day, and night. All five of them are very specifically mentioned as 1/3 of the human race is eliminated. 33.3%. This is all in the trumpet judgments after the seals are broken. And the final seal is not even broken until 2044. So let's go to and then the final year is 2178. Total sim reset. Every single Nexus year is a major cataclysm. You know, in Archaix, we've documented all these resets and all these cataclysms, and yet the pyramid is still standing. So it served its purpose. What could be so important to a technologically advanced civilization for which we know almost nothing except for references in traditions, references in the Vedic texts, the Vimana aircrafts, references in oral traditions that were later misunderstood? The Sumerian text, when cuneiform was finally written down, these were already oral traditions, meaning they were already embellished and they had a mythological overtone. So we get to 354 years after the flood is 1885. Now, after 13 years since Elam conquered Canaan and Egypt, the cities of the plain, Sodom and Gomorrah, at the edge of the Salt Sea, which is the Dead Sea, they rebel. And they cease paying their annual tribute after 12 years of vassalage. In the 13th year, they rebelled. The Elamites were at this time building great cities. Their own soldiers, now conscripted laborers, did nothing about the insurgency at this time. In the Euphrates-Tigris Valley, Amar-Udaak, too, was empire building. His seat at the new city of Babel, named in commemoration of the Tower incident, named in commemoration of the Tower incident. It actually means Babili, which is gate of God. Now, his dominion had spread from Sumer, Akkad, Babylonia, Assyria, Haran, Aram, Syria, Anatolia of the Hittites, and as far as Asia Minor. Now powerful, Nimrod sent messages to his former general, Chedorlaomer in Elam, to submit back under his command. Chedorlaomer was priorly a general under Amar-Udaak before the Tower of Babel incident. But now, since the Tower of Babel had taken place and the law of the lots had created this massive war between two huge Aryan families, which is the subject matter of the Mahabharata, it's Chedorlaomer was not obeying. He had literally forged his own empire. He wasn't coming back. So in the east, this is Mohenjo-Daro. This is Harappa. So in the Sumerian text titled in Markar and the Lord of Aratta, Nimrod is in Markar and Chedorlaomer is the Lord of Aratta, which is Harappa. Where we find in Markar appealing to the Lord of Aratta to return certain objects and submit to his authority. But the Lord of Arata responds with a message claiming that he cannot understand what language the message is in, therefore he cannot respond to it. This is in an actual historical cuneiform series of tablets. That's amazing. In the book of Revelation, we have the rebuilding of the monument of man from the dying souls of the redeemed who are exiting the construct. Every soul of the redeemed is a stone. Yeah, remember, I will give you a white stone with a new name. I will make you a pillar in the temple of my God. Remember, pillar was the ancient name for pyramid. Why? Because the sky had changed. And now the stars weren't the most prominent things in the sky. Now, there is this burning disk in the sun. So at the very end of the Sumerian pantheon, after the Sumerian gods were already well established, at the very end of Sumerian history period, right before Sumer was wiped out and destroyed by a weapon from the sky, they introduced a new god to the pantheon named Utu. And the Babylonians acknowledged that god, calling him Shamash. This was conjoined a couple centuries later into Utu Shamash. This was the sun god. The sun became the last god of the entire Sumerian pantheon. And at the exact same time, the Egyptian Ennead had already been well established. The Egyptians already had their gods and they were ancient. And then all of a sudden, right after the first intermediate period, remember I've educated you guys about what intermediate periods are. Egyptologists never want to admit that Egypt has gone through several resets. So there is revolt against the science of today because the formulated utterances that were regarded as final truths in a past generation are now seen as insufficiencies. We find in the book of Revelations, after the sixth seal is broken, very quickly, 1/3 of the sun, 1/3 of the moon, 1/3 of the stars, 1/3 of the day, 1/3 of the night. All five of these elements are completely reduced by a third. Therefore, a 365.25 day becomes 243 days a year. A 24-hour day becomes a 16-hour day. This is the quickening. In the quickening in the eschatological record, it is specifically said that the quickening is done to keep them from the evil to come, or no flesh would be saved. It's actually an act of mercy that speeds up the tribulation period so humanity can have a chance. This is the actual statue of Nebuchadnezzar when King Nebuchadnezzar II of Babylon in 585 BC had this amazing dream that was translated by Daniel according to the Old Testament narrative. And Daniel translated and told him, man, you're the head of gold. You are Babylon. And he was told through all this when the 10 toes of iron mixed with miry clay have extended to the end of their periods of rulership, these 10 being the 10 European nations that came out of the Roman provincial system. Rome was iron. Miry clay were those provinces that were attached to that. This isn't my interpretation only. Niccolo Machiavelli, who wrote The Prince, had the same interpretation, and so did many other Christian eschatologists going back to Isaac Newton. Yeah, this is something that's been published over and over and over and over in so many different biblical books, treatises, famous sermons, and Bible commentaries. The chief cornerstone is the stone that comes from heaven and crashes into the bottom of the statue and shatters all the socio-political systems of men and starts a whole new system of government called the Stone Kingdom. So there's been some interesting comments about, hey man, Randall Carlson would probably be a good debate for you on the dating of the Great Flood. No, he wouldn't. I'm not going to say no if he asked me, but he wouldn't. Because Randall Carlson, as a uniformitarian, is only going to focus on 12,000 years ago. He's only going to focus on the Younger Dryas period. And in every element of his argument, I'm just going to agree with him. I said, okay. And when he's done and he's out of wind, I'm simply going to say, hey, Randall, check it out. You just made a really good case for the world being destroyed 12,000 years ago. Kudos to you. I'm not contending that point. But when it comes to the great flood of the Bible, I have 41 different chrono markers that we need to discuss now, because what I'm going to show you has nothing to do with 12,000 BC. All my chrono markers from all these ancient texts and all these ways that you can verify with a calculator show the month of May 2239 BC. So I'm not trying to get preachy. I'm not trying to get preachy at all. I could care less about pastors and preachers. And yeah, their authority means nothing to me. I've had many, many conversations and email exchanges by men of the cloth. I am unimpressed. To me, they are absolutely saturated with dungeon programming. I hear it as I read it in their emails. I read it. I'm sickened by it, because I see all these textual and cultural and prejudicial attachments. They've got nothing to do with spirit and nothing at all. But I know the prodigal son story is even deeper, because the soul that has endured pain is the soul that can heal others. And this has been shown throughout the history of the world. Egypt's history and archaeology shows us the phoenix resets in perfect clarity. Their faith was unfolding during their longevity. And now the Ogygian deluge destroys the world, collapses all the dynasties, completely ends the Heliolithic maritime empire, completely ends all the sons of the sun dynasty, all the children of the sun dynasties. It's over with. Pharaoh no longer regards the sun as a deity. Yeah, there it is right there, guys. Nemesis X and Phoenix represented as returning, causing all this destruction. This is exactly what we have in the Revelation. We have a woman on top of a seven-headed beast. Yeah, this is the return of the Nemesis X object. The dragon of chaos is coming. It's coming to establish this total systemic reset. This is after the return of Phoenix in the sixth seal in May of 2040. And in the dictates of his father. But after a while, he goes his own way. This prodigal son is a free thinker. This is an individual who decides that they're going to go their own way. This is an individual who is very brave. Someone who is going to break the mold, break pattern, and do something original, something that was not a part of the programming. The prodigal son goes their own way. And in the parable of Jesus, this prodigal son loses all his money, goes whoring around, gets beat up, loses his clothes, gets victimized in so many different ways after partying and squandering his share of his father's wealth. But in the end, excuse me, he comes back. And when he comes back, the father doesn't throw a celebration and a party for the son who never disobeyed, for the son who never left his side, for those immortals in the construct who obeyed the law. There was no prize given to them. In the Vedic Ramayana, night suddenly turned into day. People in bed awakened at daylight. Astronomers bewildered finding burning lamps still full. So the sun became violent, then plunged and night returned. This is a temporal pole shift. This is what Phoenix is famous for. So at this time, archaeologists have dated a Babylonian omen text, and it reads, if the sun comes out in the night and the country sees it light everywhere, there will be disorder in the country everywhere. It's pretty much common sense. So the Vedic Ramayana text preserves this Phoenix transit perfectly. This is a Phoenix pole shift, and it was temporary. Night suddenly turning into day, which meant in the daytime, in another hemisphere, it suddenly turned night. We have a teaching that the Phoenix visited a world before present humankind and wiped it out, meaning Genesis is not a creation event at all. as I've shown multiple presentations, it is a systemic reset that was so perfect that it literally started a new heavens, a new earth, and a new timeline. He said many will die before the phoenix dies. Until the year 670, its reign shall be secure. What? The seven kings' reign ended in the 670th year. How do we know that? Because it was 2239 BC. It was the great flood of Noah, and the seven kings were wiped out, not to return until the book of Revelation, the future apocalypse. This background programming history that we have, it never happened, guys. Israelites were never in Egypt. They never escaped Egypt. This is background programming. It's there for us to learn. It's there for us to get all this data and put it together and figure these things out. But the idea is of a holy people exiting an evil world.